Okay, good morning, good afternoon, and also good evening, depending on when you're listening to this slide presentation. My name is Victor, and this is the Cisco CyberOps training for Tier 1 level SOC analysts. Okay, we've looked at about 18 modules in the series, and today we're going to be looking at access control. Now, you need to understand that when we talk about access control, we are saying that every IT infrastructure is going to have one way that people will have should have access to that particular IT infrastructure. And don't forget that we have about five elements of information security. We talk about confidentiality, we talk about integrity, we talk about availability, authentication, and non-repudiation. Those are the five elements of information security. Now, for you to be able to control access, you will need to consider availability and authentication. Before you can make something available for somebody to somebody, you have to first authenticate the person, then make that particular thing available. And after you do that, you now have to account. That's where accounting comes in. You have to keep a log for all of the things the person have done for non-repudiation's sake. Non-repudiation means that the sender of a message cannot deny having sent the message, and the receiver of the message cannot deny having received the message. So these are the things we're going to be looking at in this 19th module. Now you need to understand the triad, the CIA triad. It will say if you want to make sure that your system is secured, we say you make sure that you have these three elements or the extended five elements. Zero trust security. So the concept of zero trust security is you saying that you don't get to trust anyone. You never trust, you always verify. That's the principle of zero trust. So you see this approach in most security services, in most web apps, networks apps, cloud apps. Zero trust is a comprehensive approach to securing all access across network, application, and environment. You don't want to assume that you know someone. You want to always verify at every point in time. So you can have zero trust for the workforce, for your workload, for your workplace. Now, you have different ways you could implement access control. So we have what they call the discretionary access control. We have what they call the mandatory access control. Then we have what we call the role-based. This normally uses the RASI matrix, right? You have what they call the attribute-based, then the rule-based, then the time-based. Let me explain them one after the other. For instance, for discretionary access control. So you want to allow somebody to use a particular device, a particular website, have access to a particular application, have access to a particular printer, a particular infrastructure in a discretionary manner, right? It's very less restrictive, right? You just look at the need, then of course you allow access. Whereas for mandatory access control, it uses a very strict policy. So you need to understand most of these access control models so that in terms of allowing, denying, or permitting people to use your your systems, your website, your application, your printers, your hard disks, your folders on your network, right? You want to decide which is your best model. Then of course role based. Hey, you are saying, is the person in IT? Is the person in marketing? Is the person in HR? What's the role the person is playing in the organization? That's going to determine what access the person is going to have. Then, of course, attributes. So things like IP address, things like your location, things like there are some organizations that implement these attribute-based access control inherent in some routers, in some switches, in some websites, and whatever. Even web applications these days, they implement attribute-based access control in the sense that if you are not from certain location, if you are logging in from a particular IP address, you're going to be denied access. They'll tell you this web application is not for UK citizens. This web application is not for African citizens. This web application is not for US citizens. So you restrict the right to access by attributes like location and the rest. Now, rule based. Network security style specifies set of rules. So it can be anything, right? Whereas time based is, this is very classic for instance, for some routers that will have in them time based access control, where you say if somebody cannot have access to a particular router or have access to the internet at so time of the day. So you can say you can have access between 9 and 3 p.m. or if you're on shifts, you have access to the internet from 4 to like let's say midnight. So that's a time-based access control system. So it allows access to network resources based on time and day. Most routers they have such configuration. I've seen several Cisco routers, even normal Netgear routers, good enterprise routers, they have that system in which within the router you can set the time when people will be able to have access to the devices. So you have role, attribute, rule, time based access control. Now, AAA usage and operation. So don't forget I said you have authentication, you have authorization, you have accounting. At times you could say you authenticate someone, you authorize, you make the stuff available for the person, then you can now account, you can now log, track whatever the person is doing. For instance, if you allow someone to have access to something and you don't keep track of what the person is doing, how will you be able to identify that okay, so person did so and so stuff? That's why even for web applications, for instance, if you want to log in, you are going to be told to be authenticated, put in your username, put in your password, put in your token, put in whatever. Then you're not going to be authorized, you're not going to be allowed to see stuff based on the type of user you are. If you're an admin user, you're going to be granted some pages, some access. Same thing for a router. If you're an admin user, there's some things you're going to be able to see. Then the next thing that's going to be next thing that's going to happen now is that we are going to be able to account for your actions. For web application, for instance, we're going to see that okay, you browse this you saw this on your history, even your browser keeps that, right? You're going to be able to see that okay, this person visited this person bought this person have this, and in your account it's going to show all of the things you've done, all of the things you've bought. So if you come in and say okay, this is my username, we're able to see all of the products that you have ordered on the e-commerce store for a website, for instance, or rather for a network, for instance. Once you've had stuff available to you, we're able to log all of your actions within our network. So this is the AAA in operation. Okay, so this is a classic example for someone that's going to buy stuff using a credit card. Authentication, who are you? You have to get put in your details, put in your password. Authorization, how much can you spend? We have to authorize depending on who you are, whether you're a user, whether you're an admin. Then accounting, this area, what did you spend on? What are the details of the transaction that you have already done? So, okay, so this is authentication. This is how it happens for a network. If you have an AAA server, if you have it centralized, then depending on whether you're using a TAC ACS or whether you're using Radius, these are just the differences. You get to note them for the purpose of your exam. Accounting, log. I've talked about log earlier on. Logging is very important. I've seen in networks, I've seen in web applications, I've seen in email servers logging. If you don't log, if you don't see whether your routers, your web applications, your cloud servers, whether you're using Amazon Web Services or you're using a Google Cloud platform or using Azure, whatever you're using, try and see how can I implement logs. Most of these systems they have them by default. And if you get to see if something happens, you want to get to your log. If you have a cPanel for a web application, how do you know something happened? How do you know that, oh, somebody tried to be able to log into this application, he was successful, he was not successful, he was successful, this is what he did, and this was what he was not able to do. That's where logging comes in. Okay. Types of accounting information. You see, command accounting, good enough. Just last week I discovered that the Kali Linux environment keeps a long log of all of the commands that you've entered. Windows doesn't do that well, right? But the Kali environment does that. All of the commands that you've typed, even if you shut down the machine and get back to the command line interface, the terminal, you're going to see all of the things that you've done, all of the commands that you've entered earlier on. So you have network accounting, connection accounting, execution accounting, system accounting, command accounting, resource accounting, and other types of accounting. So we see access control is very critical, it's very important. If you are going to make sure that you have security within your IT system, make sure you find a way to implement access control. So don't forget the CIA, confidentiality, integrity, authenticity. And if you want to expand this, you have 5 elements of information security, which is confidentiality, integrity, authenticity, non-repudiation, and what's it again? Okay, let me go over it again. So you have confidentiality, integrity, authenticity, or rather availability, then you have authenticity and non-repudiation. So that brings me to the end of the module 19, access control. So see you in the next module. Thank you very much.